all. Bills can win it here. White puts it down. The kick is on the way, and it is good. And the Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. They win it 41-38. Incredible. What a comeback by the Bills.
Jacksonville's perfect record on the line right here.
They put in Williams as the fullback, and he scores a touchdown, the 12th year defensive tackle.
And the fans are all over the field. Incredible. This place is pandemonium.
Oh, I should have done my musical intro to try and time it. Oh, and I've already missed it. Welcome to another episode of Disguise Coverage. For those of you who are regular watchers, and I'm assuming everyone is because, this is extremely popular. Every time Greg is on, I try to hum a little melody to myself that I try to time up exactly when the episode will go live. And I've gotten closer with each progressive episode over the last month or so. And this time I got distracted, probably in Greg's dreamy eyes, and I just lost my timing altogether. But welcome to another episode of Disguise Coverage. I am Anthony, your host here on Disguise Coverage. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, 2 underscores, ANT. Whatever platform you are using to watch or listen to Disguise Coverage on, please rate and review and subscribe. And while you're there, Disguise Coverage is, of course, part of the Cover One Sports Network. Check out all the other great content on the Cover One channel. One of the other great shows on the Cover One Network is the Cover One Buffalo podcast, featuring Aaron Quinn and featuring Greg Tompsett, who is my guest tonight on. Yeah, that guy. He just raised his hand. Regular friend of the show, appearer of the show. That's not proper grammar, but so on and so forth. How you doing?
Doing excellent, man. Tonight's a good night. Things are going well. All the fun going on around. It's interesting. And I actually saw one person almost frustrated about it that, the Bills spend 20 years in the darkness searching for a franchise quarterback, and now all anybody can talk about is that every franchise quarterback is just readily available. But it's kind of nice not to have to be freaked out about it. I joked earlier that the tweet that the Chicago Bears were on Russell Wilson's short list was the highest moment since the Rex Grossman Super Bowl in their franchise. Like, that was the best moment they've had since the Super Bowl is that, oh my gosh, did you see Russell Wilson put us on his list of 4 teams? So it's just, that would have been us. That 100% would have been us if, the Bills were 4th on a list of teams that Russell Wilson wanted to get traded to. It would have been the greatest day in like 10 years, even if we didn't get him.
Oh my God, we might get Russ. Did you hear Russ mention us? Like, he doesn't mind come here. Sierra wants to come here. Why does she want to come here? Oh my God.
So it's just such a relief now that we get to debate right tackles and how to swap out parts of our defensive line rotation, because we got most of the importance of, like, what are the most important positions in football? Quarterback, left tackle, cornerback. Like, we got all those. We're good. Wide receiver. We got all the important stuff. We're just we're just shuffling around some other pieces here and there. It's a nice existence.
It's such a weird change and dynamic. I'm glad you mentioned it. I've been annoyed with the quarterback availability this offseason, not just from the perspective of, like, of course, it's when we've already got our established guy, but more of just how much rumor there is for, like, all the potential, especially with how much draft capital the Jets have and the Dolphins have, and just, like, all the potential of, like, oh, great. So, like, initially before Russ narrowed down his 4 teams, it was like, oh, great. So, like, Deshaun Watson could be on the Dolphins and Russell Wilson could be on the Jets. And I was just like, of course, like, the Bills got their franchise guy, and now the division is about to be absolutely loaded when it comes to the quarterback position after we've been struggling. But that's a small annoyance in the grander scheme, which is Bills are a good football team. They went to the conference championship in the AFC. They were one of the final 4 teams. They are a very good squad. I think mostly everyone going into next year, I don't care what pundit or analyst you are, or what media network you work for, I would say the Buffalo Bills are a pretty solid top 5 power ranking lock going into 2021. And when you get to that point, that's exactly what you said. You start thinking like, it's not, okay, we need this core foundational piece. It's like, no, how do we tweak this to get a little bit better? And how do we do this to get over the hump? For us, it's a little more, I think, specific with our upgrades and thinking like, okay, how do we get over the Kansas City hump? How do we maintain youth and sustainability at this position? Upgrade here a little bit. And it's a lot more fun than being like, oh God, are we ever going to have a quarterback ever again? Are we ever going to win the division? Like, it's just such a drastic change.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think that most people will have the Bills as the number 2 team in the AFC, for sure, top 3 or 4. I think most people will have the Bills as the top 3 to 5 in the NFC, for sure, a top 6 to 8. I think plenty of people will pick the Bills for the Super Bowl next year. I think that you will see them as one of the heavier favorites for division champion across the divisions. All those things are pretty cool. Like, that's a very different thing for us. And now we're going to get into this mode. We'll talk tonight about all the various moves and the things that have been good. And I think I certainly had an easier time picking the good and having to sort who made my top 5 than picking the bad, where some of it was kind of tough towards the lower end. You're really scrutinizing maybe guys who got paid pretty well, but weren't all that great. There weren't a ton of just horrible flame out moves. Whereas in years past, we had an awful lot of flame out moves and we would have had choices to go along. And, it really speaks to it. And now they're going to be in that mode of needing to hit on a couple more of those, needing to figure out ways to swap out, good, reasonably priced guys to replace guys that move on, because we have a lot of those building blocks set.
Yeah, I think I pinch myself every day just to be like, oh man, I've never experienced a Bills off season like this with, oh man, Chris just pulled in a terrific comment. So weird to think about that Kyle Orton and the 2014 Bills was the best team I watched before McBeane. Yeah, that's I'm even just thinking,
depending on how old you are, going back to the Bledsoe season, that was at least fun. But yeah, that you have to be at least 30 plus to even know what was going on that year. To have been watching, you got to be at least 30 to at least have been watching then. So yeah, there's plenty of people where that Kyle Orton season was probably the most fun. Maybe that brief window of fits, it's rough.
Yeah, it's just, and Lone Wolf hitting the same thing you are at, Chris. You must be a young pup. Yeah, he might be. Yeah, it's a wild turnaround to see the positioning and the thought that we're in. Oh, appreciate the comment here and pulled up. Yeah, I'm rocking a Los Angeles Kings Wayne Gretzky jersey with the Captain C on it tonight.
Very
Forget
cool.
my hands. There we go. Yeah, appreciate the shout out there from Handsome Man calling out the jersey. And yeah, we have an eye on the future, as we should. The Bills have a good core. They have a very nice championship contender window that looks pretty established and pretty sustainable with what we have in terms of on-field talent and production and leadership, and also things in the front office and coaching stability and all those things. And this offseason, as most off seasons are, you're always keeping an eye on the future, and you're talking about free agency and the draft and how do you add and what do things look like coming into the next season. But the off season is also a time for a bit of reflection. And that is what Greg and I have come together to do tonight, which is reflect, as the episode states. So Buffalo Bills best and worst McBeane moves. This episode, Greg and I are going to focus on, each of us are going to give our top 5 best and worst moves in the Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane era. Now, disclaimer, just to lay the ground rules so everyone's on the same page, the moves that we're going to be talking about have to have happened under the stewardship of both Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. So, for instance, as Greg and I were talking offline before this episode started, the 2017 NFL draft and a lot of those free agency signings wouldn't count in this example. So no Micah Hyde, no Jordan Poyer, no Tre'Davious White, no Matt Milano, because while Sean McDermott was the head coach, Doug Whaley was the GM at the time. And because this is a best and worst wink. And because this is a best and worst McBeane moves episode and not a best and worst McWhale episode, Doug Whaley and Sean McDermott do not count. So those moves don't count. So it's pretty much like once Beane signed on in 2017 in the offseason to join Sean McDermott all the way up until this very moment here, Thursday, 2/25/2021 at 9:13 p.m., all those moves qualify for our best and our worst. And we're going to give our best. We're going to give our worst. Feel free, for those of you riding with us here live on the episode, which we love, feel free to throw out your best, your worst, your favorites, your likes, dislikes. If you agree with us, or if you disagree with us, if you think I'm extremely good looking, which everybody does, feel free to throw that into the chat. I love, see Greg nods. He gets it. Love a little ego boost now and then. Yeah. He's got the wide eyes and the nods and the smiles. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
he gets it. That's why I bring him back every week. He understands. And yeah, that's the direction of this show. Greg, you got anything? Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, establishments, ground rules? Anything?
I'm ready. I'm excited about this. I actually had fun doing this, being able to kind of kick around and, like you said, kind of debating in my mind what was, the criteria, especially when you got towards the tail end of each list, like who was the fourth or fifth one. My top three in each list was pretty easy for me to nail down. And then it got tougher as you went and trying to figure out what did I value more and different pieces. So I'm excited to get into it. Are we going to count down, or are we going to start off right at the top? We're
Start out right at the top.
5 to 1, 1 to 5.
1 to 5. We're going to go 1 to 5.
I dig it.
And we're going to start with our best moves. So our best moves in the McBeane era. Greg is going to go first and give you his best move in the McBeane era. And I wanted to echo your sentiments quickly on just in putting this list together. It made me appreciate Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott that much more, because I was really like, I had a bunch of things for best, and I was really trying to narrow down like what my top 5 were outside of my top 2, and really figuring out like, okay, what's 3, what's 4, what's 5. And then even for the worst moves, again, you and I spoke about it offline, I really was like digging hard and scrutinizing everything to really figure out like what I thought was a terrible move or an awful move. And even like the things that I really gave it like 4 or 5, you can still kind of make some silver linings for. And I think that's a testament to the leadership, again, that we have in our coaching staff with Sean McDermott, but then Brandon Beane. And it's nice to finally have people steering the ship and people at the helm who we can have faith and confidence in. And I think doing this exercise for the sake of this episode, not that I needed reinforcement, but it reinforced my faith in them that much more, and looking at what was the best and what was the worst, because it put more things into perspective. And I was like, man, like I'm really happy with what we have in our front office and our coaching.
No, I agree completely. And I'm excited. I'm ready.
Ooh, Greg is ready. Best moves in the McBeane era. Greg, lead us off with your number 1.
So I'm a cheater in general.
Makes sense.
So I'm going to lump a few things in together here.
I knew it.
that involve the moves necessary to acquire and select our franchise quarterback.
Okay.
So the number 1 overall best thing that has been done is the drafted Josh Allen. So I think that's pretty easy. I think it's pretty straightforward. Drafting Josh Allen is there. But I almost think I could have made a separate spot in my top 5 of getting a high second-round pick value from the Cincinnati Bengals of moving up from 21 to 12 for Cordy Glenn. I think that could have been in the running. Getting a second-round pick in EJ Gaines for Sammy Watkins. And those picks that you got there, that 12 pick and that 58 pick, were what was combined to move up and get Josh Allen. So you don't get Josh Allen without trading Cordy Glenn, without trading Sammy Watkins, getting back a really good season from EJ Gaines that year that we got him back. I know he didn't work out great afterwards, but that was a great season when he came and played for us that year and stayed healthy. One of the few years in his career he stayed healthy.
He still has one of my favorite Bills moments from honestly ever, but when he pulls his groin but still like limps, and then forces the fumble that we don't recover, but it's just like so gutsy.
Pulls his hamstring like 3/4 into the pursuit and then keeps hopping on one leg and punches
while he's
out
like
the ball.
Holding it with his other hand.
Oh yeah, it's phenomenal.
It's beautiful.
So I'm going to throw a couple of those in because I think I probably could have made a case that the Cordy Glenn trade or the Sammy Watkins trade could have been on the list by themselves. But when you combine that together into the moves necessary to move up and draft the franchise quarterback, all those things together that lead up the foresight for that to know that, hey, this is what we need to do to be able to pull this together. We said we were doing the McBeane era, so they had already traded down, selected Tre'Davious White. They walked in with the extra first, but they knew they needed more ammo, and they went and did those things. They had a great season and snuck into the playoffs, which made it harder to go up and get a quarterback. So then trading away Glenn in a phenomenal year, certainly maximizing his value. No one would have done that trade over again. That was a huge boon to, I think the Jimmy Johnson chart to go from 21 to 12 is like a top 40 pick. So an early second round pick value they got back for Cordy Glenn. And then the later second round pick plus gains for the Watkins contract. Those things together, plus selecting Josh when I was on my knees in my basement chanting Rosen, not Allen, Rosen, not Allen, Rosen, not Allen. And that they picked the right one. That's number one with a bullet for me.
Same. I wrestled briefly with deciding what my one would be, and then based on what your one is, I'm assuming our number two will also be the same.
Yeah, I'm assuming our top two are the same ones. Yeah,
yeah, Frank Gore, and it's with that Josh Allen move. Again, you mentioned it. So to go to trade Cordy Glenn and pick 21 plus a 5th round pick to the Bengals for pick 12 and a 6th round pick from Cincinnati to go up 9 spots and give up a player who had some injury concerns, and then once he was traded, didn't really feature anywhere for Cincinnati, continued to kind of be hurt and not reach the levels that he had once reached, which was part of the reason why Beane and McDermott gave him up. And then to go up 9 spots after already acquiring other draft capital, and then sitting there at pick number 12 and trading pick 12, and then 2 second-round picks, and being able to move up to pick 7 and get Josh Allen. We talk about the Josh Allen pick and, he was the 7th pick in the draft, 7th pick of the draft. But I feel like a lot of people forget the multiple levels, exactly like you mentioned, of how we were able to get up to pick 7. And it was things that happened in that offseason, a little bit in 2017 as well, like you mentioned, that happened before Beane and what happened in that draft. But there was multiple chess level type moves and thinking 4 or 5 moves ahead and thinking like, okay, if we can do A, then we can do B. And if we can do B, we can end up with H, and then figuring out all the letters in between. And then you also have even it was a move that didn't happen, but you also had the talks that draft in 2018 of the Bills potentially having a deal on the table with the Denver Broncos, but the Broncos decided to go with Chubb. And then the Bills thought like, oh no, like, are we going to be able to get up and get our guy? Added on top of the fact in that draft, Baker Mayfield going 1, and then Darnold going, and then you have Allen while Rosen was still on the table and Lamar Jackson was still on the table. And there were so many question marks around Josh Allen just from his character and some things that had been leaked from when he was a kid and some things that he said and combined with the overall, he's too raw, he's inaccurate, he didn't play against good talent, didn't play with good talent, so on and so forth. All the moves that McBeane made to get up there and then select him, and then to see what he's done, and then to also add in the fact, because I think I can speak for both of us when I say in creating our list for best and worst, it's all about that value aspect in terms of like, what did you give up or what did you use to acquire this resource or this person? And then what was your return on investment for the allocation of those resources? And everything that the Bills gave up to get to Allen was smart. It was well calculated. It benefited the team. And even thinking in that draft, again, the Bills go from 12 to 7. They give up 2 second-round picks, but they still were able to keep their other first-round pick in the first round of that year that they used to get Tremaine Edmonds. And then they end up with a franchise quarterback who is very good right now and still has not reached his ceiling. It's just a question of how sharp of a trajectory does he continue on? Does he start to plateau a little bit? But there's still so much hope, and it's so bright. It makes Josh Allen an easy number 1 for me and for you as well. And then we've already seen a bunch of comments coming through as well. I think a lot of people agree.
Yeah, and I think that, moving into number 2 here, it's probably just as easy. And like you said, the debate that was there of what did it take to unlock the franchise quarterback, and that was having a true number 1 target. And that's the Stephon Diggs trade. And I think having the comfort level to take that shot, and that, going back, I'm not upset that Minnesota made out well and got Justin Jefferson. Looks like a really strong young talent at wide receiver. It's fun when
you see trades work out for both teams, and you can see both teams benefit.
I wouldn't undo that in any way, shape, or form. There's no chance that if you could go back and say, hey, would you take that back and take Jefferson and whatever else came along with it, no chance. No way I would go back and undo that trade. So I'm certainly very pleased with the way that turned out. I think that Stephon Diggs was the perfect setup for what the Bills needed in that moment, and being able to add that piece and take on those elements of what the team needed really set up Josh Allen for the step forward. And I think Josh deserves plenty of credit for all the work he put in, and probably the majority of the credit. But it would be naive to think there wasn't a piece of that was also certainly accelerated by adding a true number one, and the domino effect it had on the rest of the receiving core and the offense as a whole. It was pretty incredible, and I'm certainly happy to see the way that it turned out, and that those were the easy number one and number two for me, was Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs.
Same. Diggs was my number two. I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did flirt with the idea of Diggs being the one, just because, and this is something that'll probably stick in my brain for forever, wondering what Josh Allen's year 3 would have looked like if he did not have Stephon Diggs. Because, again, and this is, I don't want anyone to think that I am taking anything away from Josh Allen whatsoever, because we saw the work that he put in the offseason. We heard about the mechanical improvement and the mental side of his game and how he progressed, so on and so forth, all of those things. And we saw it on the field as well. But the drastic and dramatic impact that Stephon Diggs had on Josh Allen, it can't be overstated. And again, like you mentioned, the effect that he had on the receiver group as a whole, even I would say on the whole team, his type of mentality and that tough, no nonsense, a little bit of swagger and arrogance, combined with that intensity, combined with the work ethic and just what he brings. I think he affected the whole team even more than Josh Allen, but obviously that direct impact on Allen is what made me think of potentially putting him as the best move, because I don't know what Allen looks like without Stephon Diggs. I still think he makes a jump in year 3, but my whole thing coming into this past season was figuring out, was Josh Allen going to cement himself as the franchise QB? And he did that and then some in 2020. And then having Stephon Diggs lead the league in receptions, lead the league in yards, at times look absolutely dominant. I mentioned on the last episode that you were here, part of the reason I lost my fantasy championship was because Stephon Diggs balled out that week. Yeah. I'm still not upset at it whatsoever, but I'm actually super upset. But he delivered and was everything that he should have been. And considering the cost, so again, the Bills got Stephon Diggs and a 7th round pick from the Vikings in exchange for pick 22 in the 2020 draft, and then a 5th round pick in 2020, a 6th round pick in 2020, and a 4th round pick in this year's draft, the 2021 draft. And even that one came with a little bit of risk. I remember exactly what I was doing. I was playing God of War, and I was not watching TV, and I had a friend of mine text me who's a Jets fan, and he was like, his text exactly was, oof, ... How do you feel about giving all that up for Stephon Diggs? And I immediately was like, what? And so pause the game, went on the old internet, turned on ESPN, saw the breaking news and what was going on. And I remember sitting there thinking like, okay, I knew Stephon Diggs was good. I knew he and Adam Thielen were fantastic in Minnesota. I had Adam Thielen on my fantasy team that previous year, so I watched a decent amount of Minnesota games. But I had thoughts swimming in my head of all the reports that we heard and saw about Diggs, and how he skipped practices and how he was kind of a diva, maybe a jerk, and this selfish guy. And it was like, oof, did we kind of give up too much? And then exactly to your point, Justin Jefferson gets taken by Minnesota. Granted, that hadn't happened at the time, but the thought that was going in my head with the draft was like, this draft is so receiver heavy. Did we pay too much when we could have just sat there, kept our resources and our assets, and taken a receiver at that spot? But then Beane comes out and he makes the statement of, receiver is one of the hardest positions to get acclimated to from college to the NFL, combined with the COVID offseason and all these things. And I started to feel more comfortable as we went towards the season. And then Stephon Diggs has, I don't even know if it's arguably, is it the greatest receiver season in Bills history?
I think so. When you break virtually every record and you break every, like, it's one thing you want to talk about some of the differences. A lot of Jefferson's stats were in some late blowout games and catch up. There's a lot of catch up mode, garbage time in those numbers. Stephon Diggs had 0 garbage time stats in his numbers. If anything, his numbers. Oh, go ahead. If anything, we milked the clock in some of those games and slowed it down and took him out of games when we didn't need to. That he could have had more numbers there. So the fact that he broke virtually every franchise record, receiving wise, in a franchise record winning season and going to the AFC Championship game, I think it's easily the greatest receiving season in franchise history. Not to say, Eric Moulds had a phenomenal year. Andre Reed had a Hall of Fame career, plenty of things like that. I'm not saying he's, the greatest receiver in Bills history, but he had the best season in Bills history. And that's a heck of a start when you're on that path.
It's a heck of a start. And it's also a nice bit of somewhat of a tea sipping moment, especially with all the people who came out. I was like, oh man, if Diggs was upset in Minnesota, he's going to be so much more upset when Allen's overthrowing him by 30 yards every week. So many of those. I also love the Broncos ones. A lot of Broncos fans came in to join that argument to talk about, like, oh man, Diggs is going to hate it there. He should play with Drew Lock because Lock is awesome, this and that. And now every Broncos fan is like, get rid of Lock and let's get Deshaun Watson. There was so much vitriol that came from all these fan bases who, and I think too, especially considering what the media had said about Stephon Diggs and how much of there was for low-hanging fruit to pick and make fun of Josh Allen, everybody from all fan bases just came out because I think they disliked Stephon Diggs because of how he was portrayed in the media, and they thought it was easy to make fun of Josh Allen and make fun of the Bills, and everyone was just roasting the Bills and Diggs and Allen. And look at what we have here.
It's low-hanging fruit, And
now we're sitting here with the two best moves in the McBeane era with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. And as you mentioned, as I alluded to, these were, I think, pretty universal for both of us. I think they'd be pretty universal for most people at this point of the direction of the franchise under McBeane. But now we start to get into our 3, 4, and 5 options, and I think this is where things got a little trickier in terms of ranking them and how do you justify this? What's the return on investment? So, Greg, why don't you hit me with your third best move in the McBeane era?
So it's interesting because here you now really get into what do you value? What do you equate to the best elements of what makes a good move? Is it a low round pick hitting? Is it return on investment of a signing? Where does it go? The way that I went through, I ended up picking my third as the Daryl Williams signing.
Ooh, okay.
So I did it as the combination of taking a shot on a player and an informed decision at $2.25 million, which I think you can argue was the best non-rookie contract value in the NFL this past year. At one point, PFF had him as their all-pro right tackle. I think he's about to sign a pretty monstrous contract. We'll see where that goes. If Taylor Moton gets franchise tagged, he'll probably be the number 1 tackle on the market.
Very unfortunate for us.
Yes, sadly. So getting Daryl Williams for $2.25 million you talk about the impact that Stephon Diggs had, having 2 franchise level tackles also had a huge impact on the ability for Josh Allen to have his career year and his leap into the MVP discussions. So I ended up going with my number 3 as Daryl Williams on his 1-year incredible value deal.
Ooh, Daryl Williams was a close number 3 for me. He ended up being my number 4. And I will second that notion. I want to grab this comment real quick from Luke. So signing Poyer in 2017 was fantastic. Unfortunately, it came under the Doug Whaley, Sean McDermott regime, and we are only grading things under the Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott era, hence the McBeane name. But I like where your head's at, Luke.
Yeah, that would have made the list if not.
Oh, for sure. Honestly, that whole 27, you got Hyde, you got Poyer, you got Trey being drafted, you got Milano coming in the 5th round. That 2017 offseason was very, very buku and very good. But Daryl Williams, really good year for the Bills. And you mentioned on a 1-year, $2.25 million deal. He finished the year with the most snaps amongst all offensive linemen for the Buffalo Bills in 2020. And you mentioned it, how important the tackle position is, especially in a year where the interior of the line, Mitch Morse had some injury concerns, and then Quentin Spain is gone. Cody Ford goes down. John Feliciano is inconsistent. You've got Winters and you've got Bodker. You've got the interior just not the model of stability that you need. But on the outside, your tackles are a pillar of stability and a pillar of quality play in Deion Dawkins and Daryl Williams, and it was tremendously helpful. Williams was so strong in pass pro. You mentioned it. He was the midseason All-Pro pick by PFF, and it was nice to see what he did. And again, he comes in on a 1-year, $2.25 million deal, a deal that comes through towards the back end of the 2020 offseason, and more just like, oh, here's another former good Panther. The Bills signed him. Ha, ha, ha. And then even then we were still debating, does he play guard? What's the starting right side of the line? So on. He has some versatility. Is Cody Ford kicking inside? We end up seeing what happens. He puts together a great year. He allows only 29 pressures in 19 games. He had the best pass blocking grade on the entire team. Really good year. And again, like you mentioned it based on some other tackle moves in free agency and with some teams, he might be sought after as the best tackle on the open market, which unfortunately could potentially price him out of the Bills' range this offseason. But yeah, really low risk, low investment. It's almost similar to like the Josh Norman deal, except Norman didn't come out and have a potential all-pro year and solidify and lock down a spot. Really good choice there for your number 3. I like it, and I support it with it being.
Where are you at?
It was tough. My number 3, again, we're going at resources used to acquire this person. What have you gotten out of them? Daryl Williams was my 4. My number 3 was Levi Wallace. Undrafted free agent in 2018, came in on a 3-year, $1.71 million deal.
He was my number 5. So I'll chime in to add to this.
Like it. Don't interrupt me. How dare you? No. Yeah, just, again, that was, you didn't have to use a draft pick on him. You gave him basically no money, and you got some term out of it, and he has been a little bit rotational, but for all intents and purposes, basically the number 2 corner opposite of Trey White. He's gotten better with each year, and he's someone who has maybe benefited from playing opposite of Trey White, but he's also been tested a good amount. I think we're going into this offseason thinking we'd like to add a bit more speed to the defense as a whole, but especially at that corner position, seeing what we have to do going up against the Kansas City Chiefs regularly, and talking about what Dane Jackson could do going into the year. But Levi Wallace is going to compete at that position year after year, and knowing that the Bills took an undrafted free agent and almost got 2 full starting seasons out of him on a defense that was tremendous in 2019 and then turned the corner in 2020 after some guys got healthy and after some things were solidified. I think that's the reason it's my number 3. The production that we got out of it, considering what resources we had to use to get him, which was not much. I think that's the reason it's my number 3. And I kind of get distracted easily from time to time. I see the chat blowing up to a degree. What's going on with the Stephon? Is there some Stephon Diggs slander or debate going on in the chat? What's going on over here?
Questioning that there's a problem that he wasn't scoring enough. I'm incredibly confused.
Wasn't scoring because he wasn't scoring touchdowns. Yeah, but
because the offense scored 56 touchdowns and 500 points. So clearly, who scored the touchdowns was a huge problem. I have serious concern with who scored the 56 touchdowns. That's a problem for me.
Right. And here's also I see the comments coming through as well, and like the numbers that Tyreek put up and Devontae Adams put up. The Packers' goal line offense is give the ball to Devontae Adams. 4
passes to Devontae Adams.
Correct. I also have a huge familiarity with that because I had Aaron Jones this year, and I lost in the championship to the guy who had Devontae Adams. So I'm very familiar with all of that. And the Bills' goal line offense is Josh Allen. mainly running the ball or play action, going to Dawson Knox or Lee Smith. How many touchdowns did he have? I don't think we're using touchdowns as a metric for a productive year. Oh boy, I saw it start trickling and blowing up, and I saw that ticker going through, and I heard typing on your end, and I was like, ooh, something happened there. But tremendous year for Stephon Diggs.
18 different Buffalo Bills scored a touchdown this year on their way to a franchise record 56 touchdowns scored. It's phenomenal. That is a phenomenal statistic. Much more sustainable than one player having 20 touchdowns. It's so much better to have 18 different players score 56 touchdowns than it is to have one player score 20 touchdowns. I can't even describe how much better that is.
So you have more things to account for. Yeah. There's more variability to the defense.
Much more sustainability for
1,000%. Much more sustainability. And we bring it back. So Levi Wallace was my number 3 best move in the McBeane era. And you spoke a bit that Levi was your number 5.
Yep.
What made him your number 5, and what made him, kind of come in behind some guys, but also fall into that top 5?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I had 12 on my list of good moves. So I had some honorable mentions that I had a hard time. So making the top 5 was a big deal for me. And like you said, cornerback is an incredibly valuable position. Same reason that I had Daryl Williams number 3, position premium at the price, so Daryl Williams at $2.25 million or Levi Wallace at a UDFA range. The only reason I think that Daryl Williams performed at a higher level than Levi Wallace has achieved. So I think Levi has had multiple seasons of pretty good starting caliber. I don't know that anyone's ever put him on a list of any all-pro anything ever. So I think that when you take 3 years of that, of above average good contributions at literally zero investment, we got him for free as an undrafted free agent. I think that's worthwhile and worth making that list. And it was over, so some of the other honorable mention things that I think could surpass it. I had things like Isaiah McKenzie's waiver claim. I had the Cole Beasley signing. I thought deserved an honorable mention as a good value, but we paid full price for that, so he didn't make my top 5. Okay. I think the one that could surpass it, but didn't quite yet, is the Gabe Davis 4th round pick. I had that one as an honorable mention. Along with it, I guess at cornerback, I also had Taron Johnson as an honorable mention as a 4th round pick. I thought those were all really solid values to be able to go through.
I feel like you're reading my notes.
Excellent.
Because these are all the same thing.
Very good. Very good.
I like it. So now we move on. So Levi was your 5. Daryl Williams was your 3. That leaves us with your 4th best move in the McBeane era. What do you got, and why is it Tyler Bass?
So obviously I actually love the one. I'm a little jealous. Lone Wolf is obviously a huge supporter of all the Cover One shows that come across. I certainly appreciate everything that he offers. He made a comment earlier that I'm a little jealous. If I'm cheating and cobbling together moves like I did for my number 1, the willingness and discipline to take the $70 million dead cap hit all at once in 2018 and get it done and over with. I think that was a great call. I didn't list that, but I'm jealous that I didn't try to cobble that together as one thing that ended up being that, when you talk about all the crazy stuff with Marcel Darius' contract and Levi Wallace and all the other Sammy Watkins and all the other pieces that added up to that crazy amount to get that done and over with and allow them to have a true, clean, fresh start when many teams would have, especially coming off a surprise wildcard playoff spot. A ton of teams would have kicked the can down the road and tried to band-aid that along and not do that and keep the band together. And they had a plan. They stuck to it. I respect that discipline a great deal. I think that's worth kind of hollering out as a honorable mention.
And especially in Buffalo, where you just make the playoffs and you break that drought, there was so much pressure to continue that momentum and success. And so they were like, nope, we're going to stay the course. We're continuing with this teardown and this rebuild and restructuring of the organization. Fantastic point. I love that.
So out of all those things, again, trying to find what was the return on investment, I ended up picking Jordan Phillips' waiver claim and getting a 10-plus sack season plus a year and a half of really good production for nothing, especially taking him from a division rival where he was a high round, a second round pick that they waived and let go for free, and we got him for free. And then in a normal year where we were not also bringing in 20 free agents, could have probably got a compensatory pick for, because he got a $10+ million contract. So all those kind of things, having the foresight not to pay for it after we got the 10 sacks from him, but just, getting a 10 sack season from an interior pass rusher for free is a really high return on investment. So again, I rattled off all the different honorable mention ones that are there. John Feliciano was another one that the value he provided at a $3 million range. But again, you can tell I leaned position premium. My 5 choices were quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, pass rusher, and cornerback. And we got all of those for a great value there. So a sneaky one there, but I think that deserved to be mentioned was Jordan Phillips' waiver claim.
I like that one. He was also on my honorable mentions. I had that waiver move there. Also, if we're going to continue on the train there of honorable mentions, I had Gabe Davis. I had Taron Johnson. I also had Andre Roberts. His addition, the 2-year,
a Pro Bowl and All-Pro season.
Yep, guy who was top 3 in kick return yards every year, made some impacts, made some big plays, was a little hard done out by Isaiah McKenzie scoring that touchdown against Miami, and then everybody being like, oh my God, we should just make Isaiah McKenzie the returner. Roberts is useless. We don't need to pay him. But Roberts was sneaky there for me. I like Phillips cracking your top 5. The 5th one for me was really hard. And again, this is what put Beane and McDermott more into perspective for me, because I really had a tough time figuring out like the difference between what was going to be my 5th versus what was going to be my honorable mention. And I would honestly have almost no qualms if I took out my number 5 and replaced it with Gabe Davis or Taron Johnson or Andre Roberts or Jordan Phillips or the multitude of good moves, the John Feliciano move, like you mentioned as well. I'd have no problem with that. And again, it's a feather in the cap to Beane and McDermott. But my 5, he was somebody that made your honorable mention. You mentioned him honorably. My number 5 was Cole Beasley. Yeah. Comes in on a 4-year, $29 million deal in 2019. Someone who had shown brief flashes with Dallas and had some really good games, but wasn't a high-volume producer, wasn't seen as this tremendous weapon. And he comes into the Bills and has the most productive slot receiver season this past year, is just an absolute weapon and security blanket for Josh Allen. Constant coverage beater, whether it's man versus zone, just an absolute force underneath, especially paired with Stephon Diggs, who can do everything on the outside, even more so paired with John Brown, who's able to stretch the field deep. Considering what the Bills gave, I fully recognize your point of we paid for what we got almost. Sure. But I don't know if anybody thought what we paid Cole Beasley, if that's the type of return on investment we were going to get. I recognize the 4 years, $29 million is more than a fair price, and that's legitimate money in term that you're committing. But I think the way that he played and being, from a production and stats standpoint, the best slot receiver in the entire NFL in 2020, to the point of basically putting up 1,000 yards, and he may have if he got to play in that 17 game.
Did in the overall season with the playoff games.
Exactly. And comes in, again, just that 2020 in 15 games, 82 receptions on 107 targets, 967 yards, 4 touchdowns, just constant beater underneath. I think he exceeded that. I think a lot of us thought, okay, at least I did. I'll speak for myself here. I think when he signed that deal, I saw more of what he did in Dallas, which was maybe 60 to 85-ish targets, anywhere from 50 to 65 or 70 catches. I don't think I saw him coming in and being the best slot receiver in the NFL, even though, like you mentioned, we did pay him a decent amount of money.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to describe it, that $7 million and change was paying full price at the time, and then he even exceeded that. Like, that was paying full price at the time. We weren't in a position to get discounts from anybody in that spring of 2019 coming off Josh Allen's rookie season. There was nobody giving us a discount to come aboard here. So it was going to take a full price deal to pay the market premium on those kind of players. And then even to pay Cole Beasley the market price and have him come in and exceed that is really saying something. And that, I thought we were signing a poor man's Julian Edelman, and he was all of Julian Edelman. Like, he was the full, like you said, the best slot receiver in the NFL. He led the NFL in slot receptions. Peter King rightfully gave him a vote in the way that he described his all-pro team, because he said, I'm not just picking 3 outside X receivers. He said, if I'm going to do an all-pro team and there's 3 receiver spots, I'm going to do an X, a Y, and a Z, and I'm going to pick a slot receiver, and Cole Beasley was the best slot receiver in the NFL, so he gets my all-pro vote. That's pretty cool from a guy who has the history and knowledge of the game that Peter King has. And even if, I think more people would side with, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, and, Tyreek Hill, or whatever their top 3 were. Like, I get that you would normally just pick the top 3 guys and then figure it out. But I think that really speaks to how great of a season he had. So it's fun that we had such a hard time picking what the top 5 good moves were, because there were so many good moves. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, and trying to quantify, like, okay, the production that this person had versus how much we had to give up to acquire them, whether it be a trade or free agency or draft, and figuring out all those types of almost trying to create like algebraic formulas and trying to figure out what everyone's value was. But it all stems from exactly that point that you mentioned, that there's been a lot of good moves in this era, which again explains why the Bills were able to go to the AFC Championship and have made the playoffs 3 out of the past 4 years, and continue to seem, again, I'm very superstitious, continue to seem like they will be able to sustain that trajectory that they're on and potentially win. I'm not going to go farther than what I'm going to say because I don't want to jinx it. But yeah, they're a good team. And you don't have that without making a multitude of good moves in free agency, in the draft, in some trades. But as we start to pivot, so that rounds out Greg's top 5 and my top 5. Very similar in terms of our top 5s and our honorable mentions, but a bit different in 3 through 5 in terms of how we rank them. But no one is perfect. No organization, no individual is without some skeletons in their closet and some blemishes. And if you're watching live or just watching in general, the graphic changes now. I wish I could have like put some spooky music or some sort of right, or some terrifying thing. We now move to the worst moves, or
the Price is Right sad trombone.
I was thinking to go full opposite and doing like the happier music. I think it's Price is Right. Dun, dun, dun. Is that Price is Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Going with that. That would have been just been like, why is he playing Price is Right? That doesn't make any sense here. But
the Benny Hill, maybe the Benny Hill music would have been the good one for the worst moves.
That would have been good. We pivot now to the worst moves in the McBeane era. Because again, no one was without fault. And there are some, but much like the best moves in the McBeane era, I personally came away from this thinking like, again, because I really had to not scrap and claw to find moves that I thought were terrible, but I really felt like I was nitpicking to quantify things as being the worst. There were some that were decently egregious and others that were really just like, well, we committed X, we got W, we needed more, this can qualify as a worst. That's how I came out of it.
I don't think there were any that were as easy as Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs were the number 1 and number 2 with a bullet on the good side. I don't think there were any that were even remotely at that level of bad. Whereas previously, trading multiple picks to move up out of the spot that probably would have been Odell Beckham Jr. to trade up and not take the generational pass rusher in our backyard and instead take Sammy Watkins. There were none of those in this round. There were none of giving, an overweight stoner with a captain's hat a $90 million or $100 million contract. There were none of those moves in this era that would have been really easy. There was no Langston Walker in this era that would have been really easy ones. There's no Mike Williams pick. There was no Aaron Maben.
So many draft.
The worst ones of here, and I already see most of my top 5 being rattled off in the chat right now. So the other part was I actually had a hard time ordering mine of
me too.
Like what was actually the worst, and is it the same way that I went back and forth, like position premium, amount invested, what we actually got back. So I have a feeling our top, at least 3 of our top 5, I'm pretty confident are the same, and then we'll see the honorable mentions. But I ended up going with my number one as a weird one, because I've now been a big advocate of his the past year and how much we identified as his value needing to come back.
Okay.
I picked Star Lotulelei's contract as my worst move because we are now bearing the brunt of, out of every contract that he's structured the entire time he's been here, the only one we could never get out of was Star Lotulelei.
And the opt-out hurt us so much more.
Yes, that made it worse. It exaggerated it and brought it into further attention. Star is better than people think. At no point in the most adamant defenders of Star Lotulelei has he ever neared a $10 million a year value. He's never been a $50 million guy. I think that one tech position is incredibly undervalued, but I think they've shown plenty of different areas you don't need $50 million to do that. And what that locked up and what that limited in some of the other expenditures that could have happened, limitations on maybe making a move to bring in somebody else, and the fact that I think he's been pretty good in that role. I think he's been maybe slightly above average in that role compared to other one techs, is fine. Like, he hasn't been bad like people try to bash him for, but I just don't think he's ever been that close. And nobody else on my list, heck, the other moves on the list combined are $50 million. So the fact that it was $50 million, and there's probably some things in the work ethic that he showed in their first big signing and helping establish the culture in the locker room. I'm confident he brought more to the organization than those things. But man, the structure of that contract and the $50 million term was a tough one for me. So I led off with Star Lotulei's contract.
Interesting. He is closer to the bottom of my list. I second your notions on why, especially now, that contract, even when it was signed, it was like, we've overpaid here a decent amount. Even with how good he was in Carolina or what he was viewed as coming out of the draft, that was a lot of money to sink. And I think it was a bit reactionary considering how bad the Bills were in the center of the defense the year before against the run. And it was, again, like you mentioned, still establishing the team and the success and bringing people here in the culture. So you're overpaying a little bit, and similar to, not the exact same, but similar to having to bring in Mario Williams when they did way back when. You had to overpay a little bit. And with the game that he plays and the type of style that he works with, you knew you weren't really ever going to see the proper return on investment. And especially now, that contract is almost like a massive albatross. You and I talked about it on the salary cap special. I believe you also spoke about it in the episode with Aaron last night on the Cover Buffalo podcast, just talking about even.
We all just need to pray that he is motivated, wants to play, and contributes, because anything short of him playing and playing a serviceable amount of one tech snaps is terrible news for the Bills. Anything short of that, there are no other paths where it's anything but terrible. You can't restructure it. You can't release him. You're never going to trade him without giving away a pick along with it to take him with. We need him to play, and to play one tech well and be motivated and happy at 32, because anything else is bad news.
Yeah, it's just not ideal. And I'll pull up the comment here from Lone Wolf. Signing Star was fine. You're just saying his contract was bad, correct? That's exactly what it is. For the production that we've had and anticipate to have in 2021, the value, again, it's that how much did you have to pay or give up in order to acquire said player, and what was the return on investment for that? His production, especially, again, like you mentioned, seeing what it looked like without him in the middle of that defense in 2020, or without a true one tech in general, we saw the effect it had on the Bills defense. But even with that, the contract that he has and he's operating off of is a bit of an overpayment, and thus it makes it a worse move for Greg and his number one. That's a fair start there. That's a fair start. I also wanted to bring up a comment. You and I spoke about this earlier on Twitter, And I know I'm not personally counting it. Luke mentioned trading Wyatt Teller as one of the worst moves. I don't count this because, and I'll admit, I liked Wyatt Teller. I liked what he showed. I in no way, shape, or form thought he was going to become the best guard in the NFL or an all-pro guard. And I think to say, especially to use that hindsight, and if you can try and recollect what you said on Twitter today, because it was a perfect way to sum it up, I don't like using hindsight for something that nobody predicted or saw was coming, and especially to discount the work that the Cleveland coaching staff did in developing him and getting him to that level, the work that Bill Callahan has done. You and I spoke about
phenomenal coach.
He's one of the best offensive line coaches in the entire NFL, arguably the history of the NFL. He's phenomenal, helping Teller to get to that level. And when Teller was dealt, nobody was sitting there thinking, oh, man, the Bills gave up a lot. Oh, man, everybody was talking about, oh, my God, I can't believe Beane flipped Teller for such a good pick. This is fantastic, so on and so forth. I'm not including Wyatt Teller. I don't know if you are. I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it's a bit unfair to use that hindsight and assume, same way in a very similar fashion to the Patrick Mahomes debate of, well, the Bills could have had Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes, and at least in my estimation, I don't think he becomes Patrick Mahomes being brought into the Buffalo Bills system compared to the Chiefs system that he was brought in with Andy Reid and Alex Smith and that weaponry.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. So who was your number one?
My number one was Kelvin Benjamin.
One biscuit shy of a tight end?
Oh, one biscuit shy, one Popeye's biscuit shy. And those biscuits are delicious. He was brought in 2018 for a 3rd and a 7th round pick. He played 6 games for the Bills in 2017. He had 27 targets, 16 catches for 217 yards and 1 touchdown. That 1 touchdown, however, did come in that snow game.
So he's my number 2, and the only reason he's number 2 is that snow game.
Yep. Him and Joe Webb and Nathan Peterman and Deontay Thompson led us to the playoffs. They are the sole reason we made it. But yeah, Kelvin Benjamin had not a good start in 2017 when he came on, and then he played 12 games for the Bills in 2018 before he was sent to Kansas City. He had 62 targets, 23 receptions on 62 targets. Awful.
Over the whole 18 games, he had 39 catches out of 89 targets, a 43% catch rate.
Awful. And there's just no amount of poor quarterback play that can solely account for that. That's on him. Yeah, so 62 targets with the Bills, 23 catches, 354 yards, 1 touchdown. My reason he was my one was just because we gave up a 3rd, which I consider a significant pick. Anything in the first 3 rounds. Even
day 2 pick.
Yep, day 2 pick is a very significant thing, especially in today's NFL, with the value that you can get coming out of college. So we gave up a 3rd for him. I was still living in New York in the time when we traded for him. I went to that Thursday night game against the Jets, hoping that he was going to play. He ended up not, which is not on him. The Bills ended up in that game. And
wasn't quite ready yet.
Wasn't ready. And it took me like 2.5 hours to get out of MetLife. It was a disaster, and the Bills had lost. I was so miserable. But he didn't – I think when we got him, the thought was, oh, man, number 1 receiver. This is fantastic. And then even going into 2018, it was still like, okay, maybe we tried making more excuses. Maybe he wasn't getting acclimated right in 2017. We'll see how he comes into camp. Still a number 1 receiver. And he was no help to Josh Allen whatsoever, shape, or form. We always talk. I love the people who always like to get on Allen about how terrible his rookie year was. And fair, some of that was on him. But his number 1 weapon was Kelvin Benjamin, who was god-awful and atrocious. And for me, yeah, sinking in 2 draft picks, even though one of them is a 7th, but sinking in 2 draft picks, one of them being a 3rd, for a guy to play a role that he came nowhere close to reaching, that's why he's my number 1. I loathe that decision and dislike him strongly.
Yeah, and you even add in, so besides 2 draft picks, 1 being a premium day 2 pick, plus when they ended up moving on, ended up eating another chunk of $7.8 million in dead cap.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just the combination of everything that they went through to survive that season, it was, $8.4 million in dead cap hit. it just was never worth the investment. And that's how I did these things is, not necessarily just the player to, because we had terrible picks, but they were, Austin Proehl was a terrible pick. He was a 7th round pick. Like that's not a bad move. Like you're not expecting anything there. Kelvin Benjamin was better than Austin Proehl, but that doesn't make it not as bad of a pick because you're not expecting anything. The same way, Star Lotulelei is not a horrible player. He just was never even remotely close to a $50 million player.
Correct.
So that's why I, package that together in the way that I did. And I think you're spot on. Benjamin was number 2 for me.
Not good. So Benjamin was your number 2. So I will counter with my number 2 now. This one always makes me laugh because it's just so ridiculous. My number 2, Vontae Davis.
I have blocked that out of my mind that he didn't make my list. And it's funny. He must have been like half of a thought and then retired halfway through the thought. So he didn't make it all the way onto my list.
Yeah, he was brought in for a 1-year, $3.5 million guaranteed deal with up to $5 million in incentives in 2018. Was brought in to be the number 2 corner, and for all intents and purposes, had a good career in Miami, good career in Indianapolis, fit the scheme, was somebody that it was like, okay, this is pretty cool. Put him on the other side of Trey, see what we got. And at halftime of the game against the Chargers on September 16th, he just decides that football is not for him anymore, and he removes himself from the game, and he retires. You can't make it up. Again, we're talking about value and what you put in versus what you got out. And as Sheldon said in the comments, he left right in the middle of the game, literally in the middle of the game at halftime. Yeah, he's just out. So we got not that we sunk a ton of money in term. And again, 1 year with $3.5 million guaranteed, up to $5 million total. It could have been, but that's a decent enough deal for a guy, especially thinking he could be our corner 2. And
made the team a bit of a laughing stock in that moment.
Yeah.
If anybody remembers those opening 2 losses to the Chargers and the Ravens, I think it was like by 80 points or something insane. It was really, really like people were talking like 0-16, number 1 overall pick. They actually ended up rallying for, a pretty impressive season in the grand scheme of things. But that started off pretty rough. And at that point, after those games, all of my group chats and stuff like that for my friends was pretty painful. And that was a running joke for a while until the Bills really turned things around that, he would rather retire at halftime than to play for the Bills.
And for me, living in New York, surrounded by Jets and Giants fans, it was like, yo, bro, didn't some guy just like quit football because he didn't want to play for your team? Ha, ha, ha. And I was like, oh my God, is this happening?
It was bad.
You don't see that. You just don't see that. Yeah, he was my 2. Just, yeah.
The circumstance, really I think it's a great call. I didn't, like, because of the amount of money in the contract and everything, I don't think I included him just because it wasn't a huge investment. But yeah, if you count the emotional baggage that it created, I think it's very worthy of being a top.
Not only did you not get proper production, you got like a significant, granted it was overcome, but there was like for a bit, there was a temporary significant like black mark on the organization because it was like, oh my God, this guy would rather quit altogether than play for this team and this organization. It's just like
maybe a sneaky opening, one of those kind of butterfly wing effect deals. I wonder if Levi Wallace ends up in the position that he does if Vontae Davis doesn't retire. Then, like, I just don't know. Sometimes those UDFA guys just don't ever get the chance. Like, is Dane Jackson that different than Levi Wallace? And if Dane Jackson was on the team at that point in 2018, he would have gotten all those reps that Levi Wallace got that year. Instead of this year, just Jackson could never really break the lineup, even though he was pretty good. And you heard Beane talk about him in that podcast with Richard Sherman and Chris Collinsworth about, they asked him, hey, is there any sneaky unknown superstar that anybody knows about? And he's like, well, maybe not superstar, but people are going to know about Dane Jackson, coming up here. Maybe a sneaky butterfly effect thing with Levi Wallace there. We don't end up with the Levi Wallace that we have now, if not for that embarrassment.
So Vontae Davis should have been our best move in the McBeane era. Is with your logic? That's what I'm gathering.
Sneaky. So by
sneaky.
that point, maybe Nathan Peterman should have been like a top 5 pick. I will say I've had multiple people mention that in the comments here. I did not do any coaching decisions as part of mine, but that's not a bad one as far as if you're going to make a list of worst decisions under McDermott. The two things I was most mad at him for was the punt at the end of the Colts snow game that almost cost us the game, and then he went to Nathan Peterman twice on purpose by his own choice. Those were probably the moments I was most upset with him over. So I did not include those. I ranked the 5 worst transactions.
Yes,
was the way that I did this.
Acquisitions.
But if you just do worst moves, yes, Peterman probably would have made the list.
Oh man!
All right.
So Kelvin Benjamin was your 2. He was my 1. Vontae Davis was my 2. Your 1 was Starla Tulele.
Yep.
Majority of the reason for that because of the contract that he carries.
Just pure ROI.
Yep. Return on investment for those of you who aren't familiar with that jargon. And now we move on to our number 3s. What do you got for number 3?
Similar from an ROI standpoint. I went with Trent Murphy.
Oh, he's my 3 too.
Nice. 3 years, $22.5 million. We paid every single dollar of that $22.5 million. I spent a fair amount of time defending Trent Murphy in the first 2 years of that deal, that it was, oh, come on, it's not quite as bad. He had this moment, and look at him in that playoff stretch. What if he comes in hot like that this year? And he was a healthy scratch 6 times this season, and had a flash in the playoff game against the Ravens. I was glad that he played some good read option defense. Good for him. At no point did he ever live up to any of those $22.5 million. I am very, very fearful of what that showed and what we ended up with here. And it goes to show you that when you have, he is the kind of guy that if he was a 7th round pick or a UDFA and gave us the 11 sacks we got over the last 3 years, he'd have a freaking fan club. Mm-hmm. He's a try hard hustle guy that when you surround him with good talent, he can do a good job and help clean up other people's pressures and get sacks. And he did that in his big contract year with the Redskins. And that, that's how he had, 55 pressures and 9 sacks. And I was excited about that and what it could produce. But he is not a standalone talent. And every single word I just said over the past 30 seconds also applies to Trey Hendrickson. Anyone who's excited about him, go ahead and go read those things. And everything I just said applies to Trey Hendrickson cleaning up other people's pressures in New Orleans.
It's not like the Saints don't have a good defensive line at all. There's nobody good there.
5 freaking Pro Bowlers on their defensive line.
Ridiculous.
So when you take a look at that and you have a guy surrounded by awesome talent that everybody loves because he was a 5th round pick for them, and it's kind of fun when he's cleaning up other people's pressures, and even the freaking video that NFL.com shared about why he was like the sneaky pass rusher everyone was going to sign this year. All 3 highlights they showed were literally him cleaning up someone else's pressure and getting credit for the sack. It was so hysterical.
Someone else flushing the QB right to him. And he was
right into him. And he just fell on top of him for the sack. So just a heads up, all the people that come at me of like, oh, if we miss out on JJ Watt, we should go sign Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson is Trent Murphy, period. And he's about to be on somebody else's worst 5 free agent moves because he's going to get paid as a number 1 pass rusher, like Trent Murphy got paid to be a top end pass rusher for the Bills, and he never was.
Yeah, that's fair. This one hurts me a little bit. Actually, I want to clarify before I really break down Trent Murphy. I was fine with him. Hindsight, I hate that we didn't cut him and didn't get to roll that money over to this year to have more cap space, but I was fine with him staying on the roster for the 2020 season. With the COVID offseason and everything that happened, I am fine with the logic from the Bills in thinking that we are unsure with what we have in AJ Epinesa, and it's maybe a little too much to put onto his plate or Daryl Johnson's plate. We need a little bit more stability, so we're going to keep Trent Murphy. I'm fine with that logic. In hindsight, it's terrible and I hate it. But to your point, the reason Murphy is my 3 here, Again, signs that 3-year, $22.5 million deal. Appears in 39 games for the Bills with 35 starts. He only had 11 sacks in his 39 appearances. He sat for most of 2020, like you mentioned, and he did have some flashes. He looked good against Houston in the playoffs. He did really well against Baltimore. He was extremely instrumental in that 8-play goal line stand against Cleveland in 2019. He was just submarining linemen and tight ends left and right and setting the edge. It was fantastic. But again, it's all about that return on investment, that ROI. And when we signed him, that's a decent chunk of change. 3 years, $22.5 million. You are looking for starting caliber production at your defensive end spot there. And I feel like that other defensive end spot is cursed. It's almost like the defense against the dark arts position from Harry Potter. Like everyone opposite of Jerry Hughes seems to just, when we bring them in, they aren't able to do what we need them to do. And I like Trent Murphy's effort. I like his hustle. But again, what he did and what he was able to do on the field, it just didn't match the money that we gave him. You didn't get that return on investment. And it's unfortunate because I like him as a person and I like what he brings from like a hustle mentality standpoint, but we just did not get that production from him. Thank you very much, Alan, for the donation. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you so much. Yeah,
I can't give a better example of how fans' perception and expectations are managed by the investment, that more so than comparing Justin Zimmer and Trent Murphy. Trent Murphy has played better than Justin Zimmer did this year. Trent Murphy has played better every season with the Bills than what Justin Zimmer did. But we love an underdog, undrafted free agent story, that chippy guy who's chipping in. Look what we got from this guy that we paid nothing for. If Trent Murphy was that guy on a veteran minimum contract and gave us the exact same production, everybody would have loved him. Hustle guy, making extra plays. We love to see him chipping in where he can. It was that we raised the bar on the expectation, and he never met it.
You can't have a guy that you brought in for a 3-year, $22.5 million contract and then have him be a healthy scratch in your lineup. It's just not a thing. Yeah, and especially it's exacerbated even more by the fact that we had COVID and now we've got a shrunken salary cap. So his contract came into play and rolling that money, and it's all just combined into this ball of Trent Murphy hate / displeasure, which is, again, a bit unfortunate for him. But at the same time, that production did not match the money. That's why he was my 3. He was your 3 as well. Now we move on to our number 4s. Who do you got as your 4th worst move in the McBeane era?
My 4th worst move, again, return on investment. The amount that we invested was trading up in the 2nd round, giving an extra 5th round pick to move from pick 40 to pick 38, with DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and Elton Jenkins on the board to take Cody Ford. Now, in the same vein of my critique of the Star Lotulelei work, I'm not out on Cody Ford. I'm not saying that he's trash and that he's never going to be a contributor. I still think he has a future as a starting guard in the NFL. I don't think he's ever going to live up to a top 38 pick. I don't think he's ever, a top 38 pick at guard, you should get a Pro Bowl or two in your career. I don't think we're ever going to see that. And the fact of, other high positions of need that we didn't take. Elton Jenkins, another interior offensive lineman who has been to a Pro Bowl since then, went 5 picks later. Those kind of moves are painful when you need those to hit when you're getting into this extension territory. We're going to find out because he's going to be a starting guard this coming season. We need him to be there and to play. But, when you invest, that's been, we had a call. I'm sure some people would try to make a claim that like Ed Oliver or Tremaine Edmonds or something like that are a miss. And, you can want more out of what they're giving, but they're still starting and playing at a good level, like maybe not the elite level of the 9th overall pick, 16th overall pick that you're hoping for, but they still have that potential in front of them, and they've been good starting caliber players. Cody Ford has been a poor player. Like all of my hope of him being a starting guard is hope of, hey, he played out of position. We moved him around 4 different times, and then he got hurt. I always thought he was going to be a better guard coming out than a tackle. I'm hopeful that that's what that's going to be. I haven't actually seen anything on the field that tells me, oh, this is for sure a 5-year starting guard coming up for us. So 38th overall pick, plus we had to move up 2 spots and gave up a 5th round pick in order to move up and get him. And we could have had DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, or Elton Jenkins. You can do that with every draft pick. So that's not the critical part. That you can nitpick and say, oh, well, what if you had taken this guy? Everybody could do that in hindsight with the draft. But I won't even use DK or AJ Brown. Just the fact that another interior lineman taken 5 picks later has already been to a Pro Bowl and looks great. That's a tough one for me. So I put my number 4 was Cody Ford.
I think of Jenkins all the time with Ford. Again, especially this past year, I watched a lot of Packers games because they're on TV. Plus, I had Aaron Jones. And Jenkins was always just making good blocks and being talked about whatever broadcast team was doing that game about how good he's been and what a great pick he was. And I remember when he was taken and he had that versatility, I liked him coming out of college. And again, it's not fair to do that nitpick with the draft because you could have done that with so many people. But that one always sticks with me. Ford did not make my top 5, but he was my number 4, my 5, and then Cody Ford were all extremely close with me thinking of where they would go and how they would go. And it's spot on with your analysis of it. A top 40 pick, especially one that we also used other draft capital to move up and acquire. We haven't seen that level of production. My only reason for not including him in my top 5, I put a little more into the bucket of we've moved him around so much. He's had to fill and plug multiple holes because of injuries and poor production and different things. That's the only reason he's not locked into my top 5, but he's up there because regardless, not that I don't care, but I'm going to use that verbiage. I don't care if he had to be moved around. At the end of the day, his production has been poor and subpar. And his production has been poor and subpar even if he was like a 5th round pick. And let alone considering it was a top 40 pick that we used a top 40 pick on and then also sacrificed other draft capital to invest in, that return on investment has not been there. So he was up there for me as well. It's fair. I'm hoping, especially after, I like that from Bill, this is painful but therapeutic. I'm hoping Eric Turner from Cover One, he opened some things up a little bit for me when he did that video breakdown showing how much better Ford was at left guard than right and how his stance was better, his first step was better, his hand placement was better. That gave me a bit more hope and aligned with some of the thinking I had. But similar to your point, thinking about Cody Ford and his production going into this year, a lot of it is based on hope and hoping what he can do. And that's
and
also,
as I like to say very often, hope is not a plan.
No, hope is not a plan. And I love that you said that because you have said that exact phrase in regards to my number 4. My number 4 is Dawson Knox. 2019 third round
I use it a
pick.
lot with Dawson Knox.
Yes, you
I
do.
use it a lot with Dawson Knox.
I literally have it written down, and when you were talking about Cody Ford and you started talking about hope, I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect segue. You have no idea how excited I was.
That's awesome.
Similar to Ford, thinking about Dawson Knox, everything, and again, I understand, didn't have a ton of reps and production at Ole Miss. He's athletic. He's raw. He's athletic. He's raw. We need some more time. He can be great. But I feel like so much of it is based on hope. And again, 2019 third round pick, 96 overall. I would just like more than hope for a day 2 top 100 pick.
Top 100 pick, yeah.
Yep. I understand the positional value of Cody Ford and also what we sacrificed to give him. But I guess for me, like if we're comparing those two and juxtaposing them with one another, I'm more confident in, especially if he's at left guard, I'm more confident in Ford being able to reach average or above average starter caliber or capacity than
passable starter.
Yep, exactly. I am more confident in that than I am reaching a point with Dawson Knox right now where I think I'll be hanging my hat on anything other than hope. And again, I know he's raw and inexperienced, but at this point, he's still making certain errors. And I'm not just talking about the hands. I'm not talking about the low-hanging fruit of he just drops the easiest passes, because he's also made some spectacular ones. But he's he's not delivering in the way that you need him to, especially at a position that, not that it's the most vital position for the Bills, but with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley and John Brown and Gabriel Davis and Isaiah McKenzie, the tight end gets so many opportunities that can be taken advantage of if you have the right piece there. And again, with his athleticism and his raw ability, he should be able to take advantage. And for a multitude of reasons, we're not seeing that. And considering what we used to acquire him, that's why he's my number 4. And again, juxtaposing him with Cody Ford, not that I have the most faith in Cody Ford, but I'm very low on my hope meter when it comes to Dawson Knox. I guess it's really just like, well, I hope he does good, but I don't have a lot of faith that hope will be rewarded.
Yeah, it's spot on. I am officially out on Dawson Knox ever becoming a tight end 1. I am not saying that in the sense of I'm rooting against him or don't hope that he does. That would be cool. I am no longer planning on him being our number 1 starting tight end. I am moving forward planning as though we need to acquire our tight end 1. And that I would love for him to be a luxury tight end 2, like a Dallas Goedert or somewhere, Blake Jarwin or someone like that. They're like, hey, look, we have this athletic, plucky number 2 tight end that you need to worry about if we bring in the game. But he's not a starter. I don't think he's ever going to be that consistent, dependable guy. I didn't have him on my list because I had basically my entire honorable mention for bad was our inability to get out of tight end purgatory, and that we weren't patient enough to wait on Logan Thomas, and we tried to pay Tyler Kroft, and we spent top 100 pick on Dawson Knox, and just Tyler Kroft, Logan Thomas, Dawson Knox was my ugly stew of tight end purgatory honorable mention. I didn't think any of them individually were of the level. And I didn't mention Logan Thomas, and you'll see this in my number 5 option. I did count some element of hindsight, because if I'm going to reward the Josh Allen pick because of the patience and the plan involved of waiting and getting to that point, because you see the potential, then I'm going to hold you accountable that you didn't see the potential or have the plan to get value from. Honestly, now in hindsight, if you want to go on, hey, who ended up being really good of anyone that we've missed out on, we honestly haven't had that many whiffs. Shaq Lawson didn't go light it up. Jordan Phillips didn't go light it up. Sammy Watkins didn't go light it up. Ronald Darby didn't go light it up. We haven't had a ton of moves where we chose to keep a guy or not keep a guy, and then they went and killed it somewhere else. The 2 were guys that no one said a word about in the moment, but now ended up in the 2 positions we really could have freaking used somebody and ended up being really good, and they're Logan Thomas, and my number 5 is Wyatt Teller. I put him number 5 because nobody in that moment was saying a word. The fact that we got a 5th and a 6th round pick for Wyatt Teller, I was celebrating. It was right in line. We also got a 6th for Russell Bodine, and the fact that we got a 5th and 2 6th for Wyatt Teller and Russell Bodine when they weren't even going to make the roster. And I mean that in full sincerity. Wyatt Teller very likely wasn't going to make the roster that year and would have been a cut, and that's why he got moved. And maybe they keep him and they cut Spencer Long, and in hindsight, sure, that sounds great, but no one was saying that in the moment. And that was my tweet you said earlier. If anybody wants to show me a receipt of a tweet that they were against this move when it happened, I will retweet it and praise you to the end of the earth. If you're just saying in hindsight, man, we should have kept, Wyatt Teller. Well, no crap. Everybody, the Falcons wish they hadn't traded Brett Favre either. It's just, yes, of course. That's the way that every transaction in the NFL works. I wish we had kept all the good guys, and I wish we hadn't have gotten any of the bad guys. But I will say, I did count that in my top 5, because if I'm going to praise their patience and their meticulous planning and their discipline of having the foresight of who's going to pan out and giving Levi Wallace reps and having a plan for Josh Allen and bringing in the guys to surround him, then I'm going to hold them accountable that I think that they should have had the foresight to seeing the potential in Wyatt Teller or Logan Thomas and to hold on to them and let that ride out, and that I, would have rather that than the merry-go-round of Spencer Long and Brian Winters and other guys that we went towards. And if you're going to fault anything with this leadership group, them turning this franchise around has been about bringing in the right kind of guys and the right veteran leadership and the locker room fit and the right kind of person and human being. Mm-hmm. If you're going to fault them at all, it's that they trust that to a fault and that they lean into that too much. But how do you pick that apart when you just go, Doug Whaley, for as much as people want to give him a hard time, the man had an eye for talent. He was able to identify talented football players. Mm-hmm. He was horrible at figuring out who would be a fit in the locker room and whether somebody cared about football and wanted to work hard. But he was awesome at picking out traits and guys who were good at playing. Very true. It's that kind of thing that I don't know how you unravel that in doing those things. But, I did put Wyatt Teller in my top 5 because, if I'm going to praise them for having the vision and foresight on the good moves, I'm going to hold them accountable that I wish they had seen that coming for Wyatt Teller, and now seeing him be successful for the Browns is a little painful.
It's definitely painful. The hindsight part is the toughest. And even I wanted to pull up this comment from Truth to Hearts because it goes in line with what you said. He mentioned it's not fair that we were patient for Elam, but not Dawson Knox. Knox has to be better, yes, but he still has room to grow. My issue with the hindsight thing and thinking of being patient, and because it all connects when you get rid of somebody who develops and turns into something greater, it's like we should have been more patient. With the Allen and Knox talk there for Truth to Hearts with your comment, I think Allen showed more progression,
way more flashes
in his game. Yeah. Dawson Knox has not done anything that makes you think, oh, there it is. He's got it. You're still waiting for that light to get clicked on. He still has that room to grow 1,000%, but I think the odds were much more in favor of Josh Allen reaching his potential and making you feel confident and comfortable than it was for Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox has not shown enough flashes in terms of quality or quantity to make me think, and I'm assuming it's the same for you, Greg, as well, to make you think that he can solidify that position and be the guy. And when it comes to hindsight and being patient with Wyatt Teller, it's a real hard one for me. Like it didn't make my list, but I completely understand why it would. Why I didn't plan that.
Or hey, how about this? How willing they were to see the long-term development of Ike Bottker and Ryan Bates.
Yeah, that's when
you're how willing they were to continually fight and hold a roster spot for young guys that they obviously see potential in. Why didn't you see that in Wyatt Teller? So that's more of where I'm not frustrated in that, he would have become a top graded PFF guard in our system. I don't know. Maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have, but I'm just frustrated that, hey, you fought to keep some other guys on the roster that people didn't really see much in. Why didn't you see that in him? I just am a little frustrated that I value their foresight and their eye for talent very, very highly. They've had way more hits than misses. I think it's okay to call them on some of the misses.
That's fair. And I second that notion to a degree. Again, I didn't think Wyatt Teller was going to become an all-pro and become arguably the best guard in football. But I remember seeing things with him and being like, oh, man, like, Teller looks pretty good. This dude's big. He's got some movement to him. Like, I like his physicality, and I also like his athleticism. Like, this could work out a little bit. But when we traded him, I didn't really think two thoughts about it. But, again, when you're looking at it and evaluating it, and especially in comparison to the other players that they've let simmer and cook a little bit and develop a little more, you would have liked to see that with Teller. And I think that's fine for you to do that. Because I accept you and I appreciate who you are.
So what was your number 5?
My 5, as Greg throws out into the chat there, if anybody has any final questions before we close things out. There is one that I want to get to from Taylor that we're going to get to before we go regarding Antonio Brown, because that's a fun little thing. But my number 5, and it's tough. The entire 2020, almost like my 5 could really be a multitude of people, like the entire 2020 defensive line free agent class could almost be in there a little bit, although I give a bit of a pass to Quentin Jefferson. Mario Addison was my number 5. Brought him in on a 3-year, $30.45 million contract, including the playoffs. He played in 18 games in 2020. He had 7 sacks, 45 pressures. He had 750 snaps, which was the second most amongst all Bills defensive linemen, and it's significantly more than who was in third. He was only second to Jerry Hughes. And I know it was tough because COVID offseason and everybody gelling and getting together, it afflicted so many teams. It impacted the Bills, so on and so forth. Star Lotulelei not being there affected the whole defensive line, not just the run game. I get it and I understand it. But part of the reason we were excited with Mario Addison coming in was his familiarity with the scheme and the system and what was going to be asked of him. He was a pretty consistent double-digit sack man in Carolina.
He was going to unlock Jerry Hughes.
Yes, he was going to unlock Jerry Hughes. There was even, myself included, when we signed him, I thought he was going to be the best pass rusher on the Bills. I thought sweet Jerry Hughes can now, as he starts to come out of his prime, can slide into a strong number 2. Addison's the 1. And we didn't see that from his pass rush. And we definitely didn't see solid edge setting in the run game. We saw him vacate and just not maintain rush lane integrity on a lot of things. And that's why he's my number 5. Because, again, putting it with that contract, coming in for 3 years, $30.45 million, knowing that we go into 2021 and he currently has the 5th largest cap hit on the entire Buffalo Bills, is something that, again, return on investment. He comes in for a big money deal. He comes in, that's premium pass rush.
We paid him $14 million in cash last year.
Boom. Straight cash, homie. Randy Moss. And as Taylor just put there in the chat, Addison had 3 straight 10-sack seasons. He was super productive in Carolina.
There was legitimate reason to expect him to come in and play well. It wasn't even 3 straight. It was actually 4 straight of 9+.
Yeah. He was super productive. And again, with putting him in McDermott's scheme and system, this wasn't just pie in the sky. There was no reason to think that he wouldn't be a double-digit sack guy again coming into
Stayed healthy every year, never missed games, consistently productive, tons of pressures, was going to be a perfect fit, kind of a collapse the pocket power guy opposite Jerry Hughes. Everything made sense. And him not working, don't get me wrong. Somebody asked here about Ed Oliver, the ROI there. No player on the Bills roster played out of position more than Ed Oliver in 2020. I still had very high hopes for him, and I think getting that 1 tech back and letting him play his true position at 3 tech, penetrating going into his 3rd year, I expect a big 3rd year from Ed Oliver, and I'm that's not hope. I expect a big 3rd year from him. Mario Addison was my number 1 honorable mention. Top guy that didn't make my list. Wasn't terrible. Had some production. Had the pressures that were there. Actually had more pressures than you normally see. What would statistically look like an unlucky season of the number of pressures he had versus there. But like Aaron and I have talked about, that's like 4 straight unlucky seasons for Jerry Hughes. At some point, you got to get home. I love the pressures. I love the fact that you affect the quarterback. At some point, I need you to take the man down, and I need you to get the sacks. So I think Addison's a very fair one, and certainly could have been higher on my list when you consider that it was $14 million in cash. That now makes it harder to move on from him this year, the way that they prorated his bonus.
Oh, 1,000%. And I think as we start to wind down and get to some of the questions, which are really good.
We got some good ones already, yeah.
Some real good ones. I think you see the common themes that Greg and I were going for here. Again, when you're thinking about best and worst, it's all about value. What did you sacrifice to acquire something, and what type of production did you get out of that thing that you acquired? And that was our mindset going into it. We quantified them a bit differently, but for the most part, I think our lists were decently similar, although we had different thoughts and maybe some rankings and things, but you can make a case for any of them, and shocking that you and I tend to be on the same page a lot, which is very interesting.
I thought you did, the fact that you were almost in line with mine means you obviously did pretty well.
That's it. I was going to say the opposite. Well, kind of the same, but for you, I was like, I'm super smart and I know everything. So the fact that you were in line with me is good for you.
Obviously, it's a good sign for me.
Of course. It's great for both of us, no matter how you look at it. We're going to start to get to some questions now. I mentioned that first one from Taylor I wanted to throw up there. Okay. Is not trading for Antonio Brown top 10 or bottom 10 moves?
So the 4 hours from 10:30 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. where Antonio Brown was a Buffalo Bill.
Wild.
was amazing. Like, I had more fun on Twitter and in my text messages over that 4-hour window, which was on a freaking work night. Like, I was just toast.
I could
the next
not
day.
focus and work the next day.
It was terrible.
Refreshing.
I had such a fun time in that window. Obviously, that move at the time was while he was on the Steelers, where in hindsight, Mike Tomlin did a phenomenal job of hiding what a basket case and clown show that dude was. So we didn't know the extent. It's easy to look back joking now. Yeah. At the time, he was the best receiver in the NFL. Like, at that moment, he was the best receiver in the NFL.
Hands down.
And the fact that we were getting that for our young, strong-arm quarterback, that was awesome. It was amazing. So, it's easy to look back now. Obviously, I'd rather have Stephon Diggs than what Antonio Brown ended up. But in that moment, I was ecstatic. That was amazing that we were getting Antonio Brown. And I think that you can make a case that maybe he accelerates Josh Allen's development. Maybe that second year is better if we hit. Matter of fact, Josh Allen's second year would have been better if we had Antonio Brown. It would have. Like, he would have opened up a ton of things for him. Now, would he have bought in and contributed and worked hard and not been a ridiculous, crazy diva? Maybe not. Maybe he pulls the crap he did in Oakland to get himself out of there. I have no idea. I'm glad it didn't go that way now that we saw the off-the-field stuff. From a football standpoint, that would have been awesome.
Yeah, this one's tough for me because, again, like you mentioned, he's so volatile in the type of personality he has and his likes and dislikes, and he's so unpredictable. He's like a walking powder keg. Yeah. But knowing what happened, I think it's closer to like a top 10 good rather than being a bottom move. But at the time, if we knew what we were going to get from the on-field production, it's a great move. It's phenomenal. There wasn't one Bills fan that was disappointed with it. But knowing all of the skeletons that were in the closet, looking back on it, it's 1,000% like a top 10 good move because of what it led to and how the Bills ended up getting Diggs and how the organization progressed and just all the horrible things that were in that Antonio Brown closet. Not good whatsoever. A question here from Bill.
I clicked the button too.
What
was one for? I clicked one at the same time. Anyone expect you to step up this year?
No, I went earlier to Bill's first one. Is this off topic? What do we do about tight end this year? Would add a great new dimension to the offensive line. Greg, I know you feel very strongly about this, so I pulled this question just for you.
Super easy. Sign Jonnu Smith, and everything's good. All the things in life are good. So obviously, I've now been tied to the name Jonnu Smith because he's the example of what I want. I don't trust Dawson Knox. I want a tight end because people are going to take this the wrong way. I want to run more 12 personnel because last year we ran it the 31st most in the NFL. I don't want to run 12 personnel 50% of the time. No. We ran it 8% of the time. I want to be able to run it 15 or 20% of the time.
I want the option to be able to do it.
Yeah, I want the option that Dawson Knox is my second best tight end and that, I've made the case. I think you can cut John Brown or if we don't reduce his salary, let me say this differently. The only reason you would cut John Brown is because you want to use that $8 million savings to add a Jonnu Smith, a Hunter Henry, a Gerald Everett, a top-end passing option because he replaces that as an offensive weapon because we think Gabe Davis can be the number 2 outside receiver, but maybe still be the 4th option in the passing game. Because if we had a Jonnu Smith or a Hunter Henry, they're still a half notch above Gabe Davis in the pecking order with Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley. And we've now replaced John Brown as a passing game weapon that's there. And that, if you tell me for the same amount of money, the $9.5 million cap hit, I can have Gerald Everett and Kenny Stills, or I can have Jonnu Smith and Deshaun Jackson. All right. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. So I am also on the team that's not the most realistic path, and that if you're asking me what's most realistic, it's that we probably rework John Brown's contract, reduce it, and bring in a guy that Eric likes, like a Dan Arnold. I think that's probably more realistic. But if I had my choice, I'd reinvest that money on one of those top 3 tight ends.
I like that way of thinking, and I'm going to answer this question from what I think is the more realistic option. To your point, I think the tight end position gets addressed, but I think it's most likely like a Dan Arnold or like a Robert Tonyan or somebody.
And then another mid-round pick.
Yeah, which I'm not all for, but
I like Trey McKitty's name.
Oh, that's fun. And to Bill's point there, it would add a new dimension to the offense. I think it does get addressed. It's just a matter of that John Brown domino, because that opens up so much, both in terms of money, but then targets. I think it was you. I don't remember who said it, but if you even just right now, we signed Hunter Henry and left the offense the same, fantastic, but whose targets are going away to get Hunter Henry the ball? So it makes sense to rework Brown, or as sad as it is, get rid of him, feed some of those targets in addition to having the money. That's fair. I'm going to pull up this question from Joseph, but I don't think we're going to answer it right now. Who do you all think we take with our first round pick? Joseph, I'm going to speak for myself here. I think there's too many dominoes that are still left to fall for me to even bother predicting who we're going to pick. And I'm guessing from Greg's eye roll, you're thinking the same thing. Now we're going to pull up that comment, Greg, that you pulled earlier. This is a fantastic question from Lone Wolf. In your opinion, what was the Bills' best and worst move in your lifetime?
So I'm enough older than you that I have a couple that you probably can't claim. Okay. The Tom Cousino trade that ended up being the pick for Jim Kelly, taking Bruce Smith #1 overall, trading a package of stuff that was Greg Bell with Eric Dickerson involved that ended up being Cornelius Bennett. A lot of those are awesome ones that are easy ones to peg. More recently, obviously, getting Jerry Hughes, is a all-time, fantastic deal to be able to get Jerry Hughes for a flame out of a linebacker who is actually now a coach in the NFL while Jerry Hughes is still playing. So there's plenty of good ones along those lines. I would say, hey, it's maybe not crazy that Josh Allen's draft pick might end up being the best one. Right. But Bruce Smith is my favorite all-time player. I think the best pass rusher in NFL history. Drafting Bruce Smith is probably my best move. And then worst, there's a lot of big whiffs in the draft. There's a lot of painful ones. I'd probably say one of the quarterback ones, just because of how much the, Lossman and E.J. Manuel and those guys hurt. They were later picks, but, those kind of things, maybe you can make a case for Mike Williams or Aaron Maben. Those were pretty terrible.
I'll stick with my worst first. Rhyme there, since you're already on it. It's tough for me. The Maben one is up there because I didn't like it, and I really wanted Brian Cushing, even though he ended up doing a lot of PEDs and crazy stuff. He had a really good career. Rakpo. Oh, see, and that's the other one that I was going to get to. I wanted a Rakpo or Cushing. I was fine with either, and then we took Maben, and I was like, oh, this is disappointing, and it turned out terrible. Mike Williams is another one that is – I'm a big defensive backs guy, and I also love – the Miami Hurricanes, so I wanted Ed Reed more than anything in that draft. I also liked Roy Williams, the safety from Oklahoma, who had a pretty decent career in Dallas, although he's pretty much known for doing the horse collar tackle that breaks people's legs when he chases them down from behind, which is a terrible, terrible thing. But I remember sitting there when they took – and the discussion was either Mike Williams from Texas or Bryant McKinney from Minnesota.
McKinney.
Yep, and we went with Mike Williams. And not that McKinney was amazing, but he was head and shoulders above better.
I think he had a Pro Bowl, and I think he played for 12 years.
Yep, and he also he was good in Minnesota, and then he went and was one of the starting tackles on the Ravens team that won the Super Bowl with Joe Flacco. So that was a big thing. I think my worst, though, also E.J. Manuel is up there. Lossman is up there because you spent a first-round resource on somebody that just didn't deliver. The Sammy Watkins one is probably my worst, knowing what we gave up, and then also knowing that we could have had Khalil Mack.
If you were trading up into the top 5 and that one of the top 5 guys was literally in your backyard at the premium position when there were so many good receivers in that draft that you could have just taken any of the studs that were later on, yeah, that one hurt.
That's the one that's probably my worst, just because what we gave up to get it and what we could have taken and that what we didn't take. Best, it was before I was alive, but Bruce Smith it's got to be the best. You got to nail your number. When you have the number one pick overall, you got to nail it, and they nailed it with arguably the greatest defensive end in NFL history, so that was fantastic. And other than that, my best one, again, I was a tiny, tiny baby. I want to say Josh Allen, but we still have to see how that plays out. I would either say Cornelius Bennett, or here's a sneaky one, the acquisition of Bryce Paup, and then in his first year, he won Defensive Player of the Year. That was pretty cool.
That's a great call.
As of right now, it's probably going to, if things continue on this path, the best is either Bruce Smith, Allen, Diggs, but for me, it's hands down Bruce Smith. But to quantify in my lifetime, even though I was small, I'm probably going with Bennett, considering what he added and what he did.
I'll jump to this one. Who Dat in Buffalo, would you be open to a transition tag in Milano? I would love to do justice to the Tracy Morgan gif of no, hell no. If we can make, in order to transition tag Milano, which the franchise tag is like 14, 15 million, the transition tag is like 12 million.
Yeah, no.
In order to make room to do that, you would need to cut and restructure and move around like 4 or 5 other contracts or release 3 or 4 other players. If we're doing that, it's going to be because we reached a long-term deal with him to keep him around. If we think he's worth paying 12 or 13 million for 1 year, then just pay him. Then he's worth keeping. For any of this bullcrap that I see other people float around that, maybe we want to pay him $15 million for 1 year to get another year of evaluation to decide whether we want to be able to pay him or to pay Tremaine Edmonds. Make your decision. You're intelligent. You have multiple years of film and him in the room. You're either ready to pay him now or you're not.
Exactly.
There's no intermediary here of like, if we pay him this ridiculous amount of money that we have to cut all these other things to make possible, then we'll figure it out and you might lose both anyways. It's just crazy. I hate that idea. If we clear up the space to be able to pay Matt Milano 8-digit money plus, it's because he's going to be here for 4 or 5 more years.
Yeah, 1,000%. If we're going to commit that money to the franchise tag and tag him like that, then we might as well lock him up long term. I'm 1,000% on that bandwagon, especially after doing all that salary cap analysis.
If the transition tag thing was, franchise tag was 15 million, the transition tag was 8 or 9 million, sure.
That's a different story,
but it's just not. Still 12 or 13 million. It's still an exorbitant amount of money. It's just, and sadly for him, it's because guys like Khalil Mack and Von Miller and Shaq Barrett are linebackers.
Yeah.
In the same way that, so I'm going to go on a rant here for a second. People misunderstand positional values in contracts. So the same way that people like to throw around, the Bills had the highest paid defensive line in the NFL. No, they didn't. The reason that that it looks like they have the highest paid defensive line in the NFL is because T.J. Watt and Von Miller and Shaq Barrett are linebackers. No, they're not. They're pass rushers.
Correct.
They're defensive linemen. They're the same way that we're paying Mario Addison. Those guys are pass rushers. They're not linebackers. They're not the same as Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano. But when you go on those websites that sort defensive line spending and linebacker spending, it's ridiculously slanted that way. So if you go the same routes and you look at the Bills' linebacker spending versus those other teams, we're really, really low because we don't have Von Miller and T.J. Watt and all those other guys in those positions. So the Bills, when you consider edge rushers plus defensive tackles, the Bills are like 14th in defensive line spending, which again, I still would have liked more production than what we got, but at no point were we actually the highest paid defensive line in the NFL because edge rushers count in that thing.
Yeah, hashtag context to sum all that up. Yeah, 1,000%.
Rant ended.
Rant ended. Yeah, it's just not there. Oh, this is a fun question, which I know the answer to. Cliff wants to know, Greg, have you started to watch Peaky Blinders yet?
It's fantastic. It's so good.
Darn right.
I've really, really enjoyed it. So fortunately for me, I spend all of my career, the last 20 years has been in international business. So I spend every day talking to people that English is their second language. So my wife struggles with, if you get like somebody on a help desk from somewhere who's from a foreign country, I don't struggle understanding what they say at all. So everybody kept saying, oh man, it's going to be way better if you turn on the closed caption. I never had any trouble understanding what they were saying. I'm used to listening to broken and choppy English all the time. I love it. It's fantastic. I've really, really enjoyed it. Tommy Shelby is a phenomenal character. I'm just getting into Alfie. I'm only 2 episodes into Alfie. I'm about 3 episodes into season 2. So I'm just getting into Alfie Solomon. But I really, really have enjoyed the way that they've set it up and the family dynamic and all the different pieces. Really, really cool. I love the family element and the true kind of loyalty that's there. I really, really dig it.
Beautiful. I'm really glad you're enjoying it. That's one of my favorite shows, and I voted in your poll, and I also commented heavily to make sure that you went that way.
I was swayed.
Pulling up some more things as we start to wind down. Bill wanted to thank us because he needed tight end closure. Appreciate you, Bill. This was also forgot when David threw out, I'm guessing for the worst moves in Bill's history, the Rob Johnson move. I think this one for me is similar to the Vontae Davis one for you. I have tried so hard to scrub this from my brain because it still infuriates me, especially knowing all the backstory and drama with it now, knowing why Rob Johnson started instead of Doug Flutie when it 100% should have been Doug Flutie starting against the Titans. But then even so, even with that, we still should have won the game. And then even with that, the fact that why would you think Frank Wycheck is going to house the ball on a kickoff and have everybody go to him? And then still, even with that, it was a forward lateral. There's just so many things with
it. That was amazing.
It makes me
the
so
analogy.
upset.
So the 2018 year, if anybody doesn't recall, that phenomenal game that Matt Barkley had against the Jets where he lit him up for awesome stats.
Rob Johnson vibes.
No joke. That would have been the same as Terry Pagula overruling Sean McDermott and saying, hey, sorry, we're going to start Matt Barkley now. And there's a slight different dynamic that we didn't pay Barkley as much as Rob Johnson was paid. I get it that he was there. Rob Johnson had a lot of Nathan Peterman vibes I attended many of the preseason and training camp snaps and a preseason game in that Nathan Peterman ramp up. He looked great.
Yeah,
he didn't look good. He didn't look solid. He looked great.
Efficient, accurate, good arm strength, decision making.
He looked like a Kirk Cousins. Like he looked like, oh, this is going to be great. This is the perfect caretaker we need to let Josh Allen learn. And then to be able to go and see him just implode. There were so many Rob Johnson vibes that people said he was phenomenal in practice. He was amazing in practice. And then just couldn't hack it in the games. And the fact that, Doug Flutie was leading them on a potential Super Bowl run that year. And that they just switched gears. Yeah, that deserved to be in the bottom, the worst moves in franchise history.
One of the best defenses in the NFL we had that year. So many. Oh, God, I've tried to scrub everything.
Peak Wade Phillips.
I don't even want it. It makes me so mad. I was just a little kid, and it was so – because that was my defining, like, I was still little. But I knew from all my dad and – my brother and my uncles and all not even just my mom and my aunts and my sister, everybody who was like older than me, who would talk about the 4 straight Super Bowl losses like they fought in Vietnam. Like those were the war stories that would go on because it was awful. And then I knew that. And then my defining Bills fandom moments are when we lost to the Jaguars and it was Kelly's last game and it was like, oh, this expansion team, the Bills should win. And nope, we lost because Natron Means is 7,000 pounds at running back and ran all over us. And that's fantastic. and then the Titans game, I still can't believe it. I can remember Johnson like losing his shoe, but Christie and it still leads the drive. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember everybody in the house was like, that's a defining moment. Like we could still win this. It's okay. And it was like, nobody ever returned. Oh God, I don't even want to talk about it anymore, but that's so up there. Finish with a couple things here. Who that wanted to say for the record, I didn't want to tag Milano, but I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts.
I don't believe you. You wanted to tag him. Yeah. We just talked you out of it.
Stop being.
I got one here. Wait, I got one from Cole.
Go sorry, I clicked. Clickers again.
Any chance Gronk is a tight end target hometown team? But so one, Tom Brady's coming back. So if Gronk's going to play, he's going to play with Tom Brady that just won the Super Bowl. I will say, if Tom Brady had retired after the Super Bowl, The only place that I think Gronk would have either retired or honestly, I don't think it's crazy that if he was going to go one more year, it would have been back home in Buffalo with Josh Allen. I actually think there was a legitimate path that, for anybody who doesn't know, do you guys know Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski are the same age?
Who is Travis Kelce?
Yeah. So Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski are the same age.
That's wild.
I'm going to say it one more time. Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce are the same age. So if Gronk wanted to continue playing, I actually don't think that's crazy at all. I actually think logically that was the next option, is that he would have gone to play for Buffalo or retire. And retire might even have been the leader in the clubhouse. But I think if it wasn't returned to Tampa with Tom Brady, which now is the only option that he would go to do. But if Brady had walked away after the Super Bowl, I actually think him returning to Buffalo was real and was a possibility.
That's fair. I think to your point, though, it is below the retirement option, or if Brady comes back, he's going to Tampa option. But yeah, I think there was a path there, and 1,000%, that would have been interesting. Pull up the comment from Taylor that this was such a good show. Thank you, Taylor. And aboard all the Rob Johnson talk. We will. We're moving on, aside from me, obviously, pulling out that comment. And apologies for those that we aren't able to get to because there's been so much engagement and so much interaction. We appreciate all of it, but it's just physically impossible to get to it unless we all decide we want to stay up until like 1 a.m. Eastern, which we possibly could do, but that would be a little detrimental to other things that we have going on. But I want to pull up this last comment because you brought it up earlier when we were both clicking things. Comment here from Bill. Anyone you expect to step up this year?
I did bring it up earlier with that Oliver. That's not even a hope or a wish. I expect him to take a big step forward this year. Third year is a big year for defensive linemen. Defensive tackles take time to develop. He played out of position last year. I think that we have Star Lotulelei, and I actually think we also have a one-tech investment in the draft. I think he's going to have a big step forward in a big year, and I hope Tremaine Edmonds does as well. That one's more hope. I think I expect it for Ed Oliver. I have a feeling that pretty good, rangy linebacker that makes flash plays but also kind of bites for play action and misses on some over pursuits just kind of is what Tremaine Edmonds is. And that's not a bad thing. You know, when people brought it up earlier, he got voted into the Pro Bowl by the coaches and players, not by the fan vote. So the guys who know football are the ones who voted him into the Pro Bowl. He's better than Bills fans realize. But, you know, the fact that Ed Oliver isn't Aaron Donald and Tremaine Edmonds isn't Luke Kuechly doesn't mean they're crap. It just means that, hey, you're right. Maybe we didn't hit on generational players at their position, but they can still be really, really good. I expect both of them to take a step forward. I'm more confident in Ed Oliver taking a material step forward than I am for Tremaine Edmonds, but I expect both to be better.
Once again, for this one, you have peeked into my house and stolen my thoughts and notes on this. Same thing. My biggest hope is that Tremaine Edmonds steps up this year and has not the same leap that Josh Allen had in year 3, but I'm hoping he has a similar or close to jump in year 4 that Allen had in year 3 and solidifies himself along with Tre'Davious White as the franchise cornerstones of that defense going forward, which we need him to do. That's my biggest hope. And much like you, I think Ed Oliver 100% steps up. He did not get the positive recognition and credit that he deserved in 2020 because of the multiple hats that he had to wear and how he was impacted with how the entire defensive line played and with the absence of a true one tech, i.e. Star Lotulelei. I think with Star coming back, we see a natural jump in his play, or at the very least it gets highlighted more because he had a good year. He saw so many double teams, but he was still able to do a lot of good things. And with Star coming back, knock on wood, and the presence of that one tech, he'll get matchups that he is better suited for. He'll be able to play his more natural position. And again, he's never going to be Aaron Donald because I don't think anyone is. Aaron Donald is spoken about in some circles as arguably like the greatest defensive player of all time, which is a little drastic, but that's how good Aaron Donald is. I think it's unfair to put Oliver into that comparison and into that category of expectation, but I expect Ed Oliver to have a very, very, very good year for the Buffalo Bills defense now that Star is coming back.
Absolutely.
And I think That's about it. You got any other comments or anything you wanted to pull up? Questions? Or
No,
like
this was a good cathartic exercise. So obviously, it's always fun to flaunt the good things. We know there's been a lot more good than bad with this regime and with this leadership group. But like I said, I think it's still fair to hold them accountable. No GM or leadership group is flawless. These guys are certainly not flawless. The best guys hit on more than they miss. Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have hit much more than they've missed. And I hope that they continue to show the capacity and willingness and desire to learn from those misses. And if they continue to do that, we're going to be in really, really good shape.
1,000%. The good thing to take away from this, again, no one's perfect. No one is without fault. But the amount of good, I think, significantly outweighs the amount of bad. The hits outweigh the misses when it comes to this regime. We are in good hands going forward. But it's always fun at this time of year as we're talking in the offseason and thinking about, what comes next and who comes in. So in looking forward, it's always fun to look back and reflect and think about, especially when you're in a good place like the Bills are right now. It's fun to look at the good things that led you there and then also some of the bad and talk about, what could have been and how you overcome. And I think it's all, hopefully, signs continue to point upward and trend upward for this organization, thanks to the efforts of McBeane, a.k.a. Sean McDermott, and Brandon Beane. And yeah, good cathartic experience, good fun time, very long episode, which I guess I am not shocked at whatsoever because you and I both talk a lot and we both like to go back and forth and engage. Plus, I think part of the reason we went so long with this episode, again, tremendous engagement and thoughts and comments in the chat. Awesome questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, all that stuff. Really appreciate that. And Greg, I appreciate you for once again coming on the show. It's always a pleasure. You are a favorite guest of mine to bring on, as always, for a multitude of reasons. Yeah, I really just like to bring you on because I like to get the view of those awesome mahogany cabinets you got behind you there. They're fantastic to look at. I don't know if it's mahogany or some kind of like cherry, but it's got a great finish. It's got a great shine. That's the number one reason.
It smells very, very rich and hearty when you're here in person.
I always think of the Anchorman quotes with that, and then I also think of Emperor's New Groove when the evil, I forget her name, the evil witch, she tells Kronk to break down the door. He's like, break it down, you kidding me? That's hand-carved mahogany. That's what I always think of every time I see your cabinets. I don't know how many people are going to get that reference, but yeah, that's me. But yeah, Greg, you're fantastic, and I'm sure all the people watching at this point know who you are and where to find you. But just in case they don't know, or just in case they forgot, why don't you let the good people know who you are and where to find you?
Yeah, come and find me, usually antagonizing someone on Twitter at Greg Tompsett. You can also find me joined by Aaron Quinn on the Cover One Buffalo podcast. I promise I'm worth tolerating to get to enjoy Aaron.
Well,
it's a good time. Come on over. Always having fun with Bills fans and getting excited. This is my time of year from a salary cap standpoint and all the fun parts of maneuvering the roster. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm there anytime you have any questions about restructuring or contract extensions or how the different guys could get fit in. Shoot me a question. I'll be happy to answer.
Greg is legitimately, I'm not just saying it, Greg is one of the best follows when it comes to things in general, but especially with regards to the NFL and especially with regards to the Buffalo Bills. Greg was one of the first accounts that I followed when I started getting more into Bills content creation, even before I was part of the Cover One team. So he's a tremendous follow. Awesome. Give him a follow for that. You're welcome. It's all lies. I'm not really telling the truth. And I, of course, am Anthony, your regular host here on Disguise Coverage. We might not have a Disguise Coverage episode next week. I have to travel on the back end of next week and do some crazy things. So hopefully this long episode we'll be able to hold everyone over just in case that happens, but I will be communicating info on that on the old Twitter. So along with all NFL things that I'm always tweeting about on the old internet, that's my social media. Find me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro2_ANT. At me with any questions. Follow me. Pledge your undying allegiance and fidelity. Sign the blood oath. Give me the deed to your house, and just money into my bank account, and promise me all types of things that like you would promise Rumpelstiltskin in some type of like shady deal, all that kind of stuff. Please rate and review and subscribe to the pod, Disguise Coverage. Check out all the awesome content from Cover One, from Greg, from Aaron, from The Hoof, Eric Turner, and the Film Room, and all that kind of stuff. Again, we appreciate everyone riding with us live on this episode, all the engagement, all the interaction. Fantastic. If you are watching later or listening later, Thank you for your listen, your watch, your download. Appreciate everybody. I hope you and your friends, family, and loved ones, as always, are staying safe, staying healthy. Keep the faith. Go Bills. I'll maybe see you next week. Maybe not. We got some free agency around the corner. It's an exciting time. Appreciate everybody. Greg, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming by as always. And everybody have a good night. Go Bills.